Thank you very much, Ranking Member Collins. Thank you again, and thank the Chairman for holding this hearing. I also want to say your statement about the reputation of the Maine Consumer Credit Protection Bureau is spot on. They're known around the country for the great work that they've done and the great leadership you've shown. I also want to say that Mr. Pearce and I had a chance to work together when I was at the Consumer Agency and he was working for Chairman Bear on multiple consumer issues, including particularly mortgages. And so I know you have great experience and want to thank you for being here today. And Mr. Silberman, whom I worked with at the Consumer Bureau and for whom I have great respect, has great knowledge of the industry and great judgment. And so I very much appreciate your being here today and appreciate the work that all of you are doing on behalf of our consumers. I thought what I'd follow up on is where Ranking Member Collins started us, and that is on online lending, if I could. Payday lenders do not have a physical presence in Massachusetts as well, but we remain very concerned about the growth of online payday lending. I understand from the Pew Charitable Trust that more than 3 million Americans received an online payday loan in 2010. The number is expected to increase significantly. It's now at about 35% of payday loans were online in 2011, and it's expected to be about 60% of all payday loans by 2016. It's a grim future to think about. So I'm very pleased to have sponsored with Senator Merkley the Stopping Abuse and Fraud in Electronic Lending Act, with the acronym of SAFE, Lending Act. It's an act that would help close loopholes and better protect consumers in online lending and other forms of electronic lending. So, Mr. Wright, I wanted to ask you, if I could, to take, I think, what's the next question, and that is, what things would be helpful at the federal level in terms of making sure that consumers are better protected?
Well, I appreciate that question. I've seen and familiarized myself in a general sense the SAFE Act proposal that is being sponsored. We have a SAFE Act in Maine. Of course, the federal act from a few years ago mandated states to adopt SAFE Acts in the area of mortgage lending. Mm-hmm. And we did that promptly. The proposal now, as I understand it, would be essentially to expand that same kind of licensing requirement and so on to the area of payday lending. In addition, as I read the proposals, and I may have not gathered them all, there's one point that I think that needs to be stressed here, and that is meaningful, for instance, meaningful disclosure is one thing, and that may go to consumers not being bamboozled. But some are going to be, and so how do we get a handle on that? And I think the answer is keeping in mind that these transactions these days now are not literally paychecks, post-dated paychecks, or checks, but are all done by ACH debiting. I would propose to you consideration of requiring banks to be sure before debits are made to consumer accounts that those debits are compliant with state laws.
So, superb point, Mr. Wright. And in fact, can I just expand the point a little bit in asking about this with remotely created checks? The notion that payday lenders are getting access, direct access to people's checking account.
That's right.
Whether or not better protection to give consumers control over their own checking accounts and the ability to stop those, the access and the withdrawals from their accounts when they see a problem. Would that be a useful tool?
It is. I think some of that actually has already been done under the Electronic Fund Transfer Act at the federal level, allowing consumers to stop payments and so on, but it obviously can be beefed up because to the extent that it is already the law, perhaps that law has not been working as effectively as it might be.
Right. And then I think you mentioned earlier, I just want to see if we can kind of go through a list here, the idea of making sure there's a level playing field, and that is that everyone must be compliant with local state laws on usury. So if someone's lending online in Maine, they must follow Maine law. If they're doing it online in Massachusetts, they must follow Massachusetts law. Would that be helpful?
I think that's the real point at which these abuses can be pinched.
Good, good. And then if I can ask you about one more, are you familiar at all with lead generators?
Well, generally, yes. Somebody will go online and, you know, I mean, I always ask people, how'd you find these folks? And, you know, they're up at 2 a.m. clicking away on their computers and hit a button, and it doesn't necessarily go directly to a lender, but it goes to a lead generator, and then the inquiry made by the consumer gets kind of farmed out, shipped out to one lender or another. And so while we don't deal directly with the lead generators, what we hear about, and frankly, the consumers don't even know how the lead generation process is working. What we're dealing with and the complaints we take are about the payday lenders, you know, flybynight.com, cash for you,
right,
or whatever.
That's
what we hear about.
So I take it more restriction on the lead generators too could be very helpful.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. It goes hand in hand.
Good. Thank you very much, Mr. Wright. Mr. Silberman, may I have one more minute?
Absolutely.
Thank you. Mr. Silberman, could you comment on Mr. Wright's comments, since not directly on the bill, I know that's not what you're here to do, but on Mr. Wright's comments about what might be helpful at the federal level to deal with payday lending?
So, Senator Warren, appreciate your understanding that the Bureau doesn't comment on particular pieces of legislation, but the principle of a level playing field is a sort of core bedrock principle on which the agency was founded. That applies with respect to depository and non-depository institutions, but it certainly should apply equally with respect to lenders who take different forms online versus a marketplace can't work. A competitive, fair marketplace can't work if not everybody is governed by the same set of rules. So having consistent rules that all players have to abide by seems to me to be a sort of first principle of consumer protection.
Thank you, Mr. Silberman. Very helpful. And Mr. Pearce, would you like to add anything to that?
Sure, if I could. I think Mr. Wright makes an important point about banks being really the gatekeepers of the processing networks. And the FDIC has been active in this area to remind banks about their responsibilities to do due diligence in monitoring of transactions that go through the payment system. And just last year, we issued guidance that really encourage institutions to be careful and attentive to higher risk types of transactions, whether they're online payday lending or they could be online gambling or different other kinds of activities. They do have a role to monitor that and make sure that they're not illegal.
Good. Thank you very much, and thank you very much for your indulgence. I appreciate it.
Thank